Good morning, everyone. I'm Terry Nugent. I'm the MICIP lead, which basically means I manage the statewide effort around MICIP. And I'm with the Michigan Department of Education. Excited to be here today. My partner, Ben Borkel, as Dave Hunt explained, spent the night in Detroit. He missed his connector back to Grand Rapids, and so he was supposed to be here today. And he really regrets that plane connection didn't happen. So his apologies. He asked me to make sure that everyone knew that. So today, as Dave mentioned, we're going to look at monitoring and adjust. For some of you who have attended some previous presentations, this is going to feel very familiar today. We have a lot of material to cover in 50 minutes. Normally, I'd stop and pause and make sure that, if we have any wonderings or questions, to address those. Hilda, thank you. She has offered to watch the chat today. So if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. And if we can address them during this presentation, we will. Otherwise, I will get back to you and give you the answer you need here. So what we're hoping to do today is really three basic things. We want to look at the, for you to understand the purpose and the role of monitoring and adjust. This is what makes continuous improvement come to life. So it's really important. Look at identifying some tools that can be useful for your district as you begin your process of monitoring and adjusting. And I hope everyone in this presentation today has had an opportunity to at least go there a few times. If you haven't, then at the end of today, I would suggest get into the training environment and go ahead and really look at monitoring there. If you do it in your district environment, you may find that some things tend to be permanent. So please, if you're going to play around in training. And then also we want to make sure you understand how this works in the MICIP platform. So with that, we want to really, monitoring is, as I said, is that part that really looks at progress. How are we doing? We don't want to, we may have done in previous types of planning tools, wait to the end. At the end of the school year, it's June, we've got to look at, did we hit the mark? Well, that's too late. You need to really build in a system of looking at progress, of how you're doing in implementation as well as impact. And I will explain the differences of those two things in a minute. And there's three quotes that we always think about when looking at monitoring. And that is the minute you start implementing is when you start monitoring. You really need to put that into your MICIP platform. What gets monitored gets done. And this is very true. You even know that in your life at home, it's like, okay, I gotta do this. Is it done? Nope, we gotta do it again, that type of thing. And then lastly, plan for the monitoring and monitor what you plan. And that's really, monitoring just doesn't happen. Just like when you meet with your continuous improvement teams, you have a date set. I mean, it's a scheduled event, and that's what we're suggesting for monitoring as well. So what do we know? When we get together as a continuous improvement team, these are the type of questions that I would suggest that you really focus on. So what's working? How are things going? And it's not just based on student performance numbers, but also too, do we have buy-in from staff? Is it that parents know exactly what we're doing? Really look at holistically what is working. And then, of course, what may not be getting done in the intended impact. So if we're supposed to be targeting a particular group of students and we see that that's not working, you need to address that. You need to look at what's working, what's not working. And then the why. We ask this a lot in MICIP, right? When the data story, what students need, we ask, why is that happening with our root cause analysis? That also happens here at monitoring. Why are we getting the results we're getting? Or maybe we're not getting those results. Why is that happening? And then how do we know? What is the evidence? What is the measures or marks, interim or end target measures that we use? And are we using surveys? Are we really looking at a multifaceted view of data? In other words, Are we looking at academic, non-academic, and systems data? Do we need to adjust is a really big question when looking at monitoring plans, because as we know through implementation science, that there's something called the implementation dip, right? And so things get worse before they get better, because if it's a big change, this goal is really looking at some adjustments. Take the time to discuss it first. Don't be too quick to go ahead and to adjust. And then what do you need to adjust? That's really important. When looking at plans, and this has been happening a lot for the last year or so, as districts are really digging deep into their plans, they realized that they didn't understand the stage they were in implementation. And so they made their timeline for the end goal too short. And so that was an adjustment that needed to be made, extend that goal out so that you'll be able to do it. But I caution you when changing dates, because the more you do that, the less confident your stakeholders will have in your plan. So that's why look at adjustments, really take the time to think about it, and then exactly what do we need to adjust. And then lastly, is the funding aligned with the plan? And this is why when we look at the MICIP continuous improvement teams, we talk about having various perspectives on the team. And one of those is definitely state and federal funding, or your business officer, or whomever is going to help you keep that funding in line. So here's a really interesting question we get a lot. When MICIP first came out, we still continue to say this, it's a district goal. It's a district goal. And schools get really confused. It's like, what about us? I mean, we used to submit our plans, and then the district would take their plans and combine them. Well, we want to make sure that when we look at monitoring, there are unique responsibilities for the district and the school, but there's this combined team that you really need to focus on. And this is what this slide is talking about here. So we know that at the school level, this is really where the strategies and the activities live. This is the level that they're accomplished in most cases. And so that school continuous improvement team would monitor and possibly adjust, and then report out to that next level, which could be a district team. So depending on your systems, like I'm looking at Hilda right now, she has several layers of teams that exist in their district because they're large. Where if anyone's from Escanaba, we all know that there's probably a team at each of the building levels and a team at central office. So it's smaller. MICIP is meant to work for everybody. So when we look at the district, then the district would collectively get all of the building information and how they're progressing their strategies and activity towards the goal. And they would keep that broader view and watch through that. But when we look at the combined efforts, it's that lateral and horizontal communication that happens all the time. And this is where MICIP platform really helps with that, because as those of you who have been in the platform know, that you can look at all the previous notes from the other teams to see. And of course, evidence is crucial. I had a conversation yesterday from an ISD asking about, well, evidence is the data, right? And I'm like, yes, but it's not data reports per se. So evidence is proof that an action has taken place. So for an example, let's say that one of our activities is all staff will be trained in the new program that we're introducing into the district. Well, the evidence for that may be the agenda for the professional learning or the sign-in sheet. So it's not always just reports or, taking our NWEA report or MSTEP report. Evidence is really proof of what's happening. And just to focus at the bottom of this slide with the question is, how will you ensure that the monitoring process is consistent across entities monitoring the same thing? That is key. You need to make sure that in your various teams, looking at continuous improvement, that you're looking at the same thing in the same way. And again, that happens through strong communications. there's a lot here. I'm not going to go through and read it all for you, but I am going to point out some things when considering monitoring in your system. And that is the second, informs movement between stages. This is the example I gave prior with the dates. Really understand where you are in your process. If you are continuing in for the last few years, really focused on, let's say, improving writing, K-12, you probably are not in an exploration level, that very basic level. You may be still installing it, or you may be just in full implementation. Really, and we have information on this later on in the presentation, but really consider, where are we in this process for change? All right, and so here, when we look at the different types of goals, as I've mentioned before, really make sure you look at the academic, non-academic, and systems. Even if it isn't in your interim and target measures, it's important to do that. Moving on. All right. So here we're looking really at the activities that are focused on our plans with strategies. And we recommend that you have an adult focus as well as a student focus. And as you know, the impact tool really looks at fidelity, right? Fidelity is that adult focus. Are we following the plan the way it's intended? So is capacity. Do we have all the materials and systems in place to really make it work? But the student focus is really on scale and reach, right? So are we reaching the kids that we need to reach? And scale, again, goes back to implementation. Are we at the right stages? And looking at, for example, if you're in the exploration stage, you're really working on buy-in and understanding and so forth. So really consider that when looking at monitoring, and as you notice here in red, evaluation too, when you get to that end of your goal. Well, this slide here is to really represent how monitoring and evaluating are really one and the same. And if you notice that there are the texts that are different colors in each of these 4 areas, it's really verb tense, isn't it? So we have monitoring is the present day. It's what's currently happening now. Versus evaluate, we are looking back at our performance. And so those verbs are in the past. So really, we think of monitoring, actually, we would say at the beginning of your data story. Think about monitoring then. Don't wait to think about monitoring when you get to implementation. So think about it from the very start. And as I said before, you really want to plan for monitoring. It just doesn't happen. Here are some ways to really think about when we look at implementation with fidelity. And with this, then it's just to understand, going in and looking at, are we doing the right thing? And can we do it the right way? Those are the 2 basic questions that you ask, especially around adapting strategies. And so here you can see the flow, if it's a yes or it's a no. Excuse me. And then making sure that we do choose the best practice for that. And there's a lot of research around this. Those of you who do not have the process guide, I highly recommend. And Hilda, if you have a chance, if you could go out and get it on the website, please, and put it, thank you, in the chat.
Of course.
The process guide, what makes it so valuable is that it goes through and explains what we're talking about here, but it also gives you the why, the various questions around that, and also an abundance of resources. So the process guide is really very, very helpful. A little bit of a warning, it's several pages long. I think we're up to 80 now, or 78. And so you may not want to print it. You may just want to put it on your desktop. Okay, so we're going to now look at this idea of the impact or implementation here of these of a plan. So when you do your monitoring notes and you get into that section of the platform, you'll notice that these 3 boxes are present, not necessarily impact, because impact has to do with evaluation. But the fidelity, the capacity, and scale, we all know are three major elements in actually getting a goal to completion, right? So following that, and we're going to go through each of these elements here in a little more detail. So starting with capacity, and we always start with capacity because we want to make sure that we have everything in place. And so as you see here, when we look at capacity, we look at systems, the activities, the resources that are needed to do the program we're doing, or the intervention, or the change that we're trying to make. We need to make sure that everything's in place the way it was intended. Also, we need to look at what progress we're making in supporting those plans. So do we continue to have the funding that we wanted? Did we hire those coaches that we said we would hire? Are all the materials available? What about planning for space? Like, for example, I can remember having an after-school program, and it was so popular that we were putting kids in the hallway because there was just, so you need to really look at all those elements regarding capacity. And here is, again, looking at the National Implementation Research Network, or NIRN. NIRN has done a wonderful job of really helping us give some of the background information and also a lot of tools. And this is an example of a tool to help a team really look at their capacity level. And you'll notice that on the left, there are 12 questions that a district could select from. That's not an expectation that you would do all 12, but you would really look at a few of these that maybe they're wondering about. I'm looking at number 6, for example, is leadership knowledgeable about and in support of this program or practice? That's a big question, right? Not all our superintendents are into the specific details of a plan, but when they get out in public and say things about your plan, do they know about it, right? So that's a good question in terms of building capacity, is that everyone on the team understands what's happening. And at the bottom, you'll see there is a link to the NIRN Hexagon tool, and we'll talk about the Hexagon tool in a little bit. But that is very helpful for us to determine 6 factors of implementation and then impact. And on the other side is just a little sheet for your district, if you would like. I would probably suggest we put it in a Google Doc and put it in some kind of central place where your team can reach it. But again, it's just a quick way of looking at the essential elements of capacity and understanding where we are in that. And I love that last column about adjustment. Keep that in mind. If things aren't going well, when do we make that change? So it's just, again, it's another little tool that your district could use. So here we have, this is, again, this district capacity assessment is linked. You can get to it. Again, it comes from our partners at NIRN, who had a lot to do with our comprehensive needs assessment. And so, in fact, if you think back and you've been through the MICIP process now, do you know where the comprehensive needs assessments is located? Because we've embedded all of our tools that are required by state and federal law in MICIP. And as we've said many times, compliance is a result and not a driver. So what that means is that you're creating meaningful plans that will help your district meet the needs of your students. You're not creating plans to get federal funds. So, which is what past practice was. It's like they do the plan, they put it on the shelf, they take it off in June. No, we want this viable. So for the answer to that is actually, it's in the data story. All of those questions are there. And so NIRN really had done a nice job of helping us really synthesize what it really was that needed to be addressed to really have a comprehensive view of what was happening in the district. And then the second one are drivers for best practice. I really would suggest that you download this and review it, because it's very insightful, and it really provides a lot of meaning in looking at best practices. So when we really think of fidelity of monitoring, we really look at it in a couple of ways. We look at it at the strategy level, and then we look at the plan level. And if you go into the from the portfolio into monitoring, which is there's a button right there attached to your goal, you'll notice that that first page talks about the implementation of the goal itself, the plan. But then the monitoring notes is a second page, which talks about the monitoring of strategies. So we have broken this up into two levels so that your team can really focus on that fidelity element. So what is fidelity? What are we talking about here? And that is, and we think of this as it's a degree. It's like, how accurate are we to implementing that strategy as the way it was intended? Did we do all the activities? Did we bring research or evidence to our discussion to talk about how well we are doing? And of course, because this is implementation, we want to look at progress as well. And are we making progress as we thought we would? That's what makes the challenge statement so important, because it's, if we do this, then this will happen so that students would then achieve to their potential. So fidelity and asking about progress are really important here. So we can look here at, we have a strategy implementation guide that is, you can find this on our website. And it really adjusts that what and how for strategy implementation, really looking at, are we making gains? It's interesting to note that you have to achieve a strategy. You have to acknowledge that the goal was achieved, but the activities as a whole, you don't have to check off all those boxes. But if you don't check all those boxes and you begin to evaluate whether the plan has worked or not, you really do need to address those. So, so it's just something to consider as you're looking at implementing strategies. Here is again, it's in the process guide, the strategy implementation guide. It's really important to really look at those elements of the strategy to make sure that you have what is going to be our ultimate goal or a gold standard. It's something that we can live with, or this is a non-negotiable, this is unacceptable, and really plan that out ahead of time so that if you begin to achieve a gold standard, you'll know what that looks like when it's there. So this is just a real quick, easy guide or tool that will help you as you begin to implement a strategy. Some more information here. And if you want to go, we know that we don't work with student data, right? There's no personal identified data in MICIP, but you can look at monitoring classroom strategy, especially if you're targeting a grade level that has great needs in an area. And then another real quick tool here is the monitoring of that, looking at the strategy and then in the school improvement plan or at the school level specifically. And it just gives you some idea of what you really should be looking for here. And again, we emphasize evidence a lot, right? It's like evidence is proof. So what proves that you've been doing this? And those of you that know, we cannot add hyperlinks directly into our text box, but a workaround, if you want to hyperlink to, say, a Google document in your in your cloud, right? You could do that through a like a document. Upload a document that contains the hyperlink. And then once you open that document and click the hyperlink, you'll get to that area. So it doesn't have a direct hyperlink. My development team hasn't yet figured how to do that. So we want to make sure, though, that we make it convenient for you to gather the information you need. So that's a quick and easy turnaround here. All right. Going back to the idea of stages and where we are, again, it's an important conversation to have. And not just at the beginning when creating your plan, but for now, like as you've been, living your plan, looking at it, are we progressing through stages? Are we done with exploring? Everybody knows what we're talking about now. There's buy-in and understanding why this particular goal was set and why these strategies were selected. Are we then now into some initial implementation? In other words, okay, is everyone trained? Do we have a system of communication to our parents and our students as to how we're doing? So this guide here, again, is very, very helpful in helping you understand the stages of planning. It also has in here, as most NERN documents do, a rubric that helps you evaluate where you are as well. So again, it's a really nice tool. I highly suggest that you really look at that. And as you see here, the 3 bullet points here that we're talking about, looking at those stages, planning for that, making sure that your activities are aligned with where you are in terms of the stage of implementation. As we know, sometimes I think when we misdiagnose our stage, there are elements that are left behind that were crucial in supporting the next level of growth and implementation. So, for example, you'll see in exploration, there's a lot of emphasis on communication. Well, if you haven't communicated very well, and all of a sudden now we've got this new and added thing on the plates of teachers, there's going to be some questioning, possible resentment. You want to make sure that you're looking at those activities or elements that are essential for each of the stages are happening. And of course, as I said, it will help you move into the next stage. All right, so scale and reach. This is a big one. This is the one that really talks about the impact to students, right? Because we want to look at, are we reaching the kids that we intended to reach? And we really need to make sure that we, during our assess needs process and in looking at interim and end target goals, that we actually add that element to, especially to an interim goal, is to look at the evidence that we used in the beginning in our data story to look at the needs of this particular group of students. So it's important to take the time to really to look at that. And then of course, like I know there's a lot of districts right now that are using, like, for example, MTSS strategies, right? So, our tier 1 really focuses on all students. So that would be a reach that we would want to look at. But then when we start looking at tier 2 and tier 3, there's another example of a degree of reach, right, to a particular subgroup of or a group of students. And so again, really looking at that, and that scale, when we talk about scale, we're talking about stages of implementation, right? So making sure that we know we're making progress through as we live this goal. Oops, sorry. Here's some suggested questions that would help you as you go through and look at scale and reach. A lot of these I've already have talked about. And so the 5th bullet, I think, is really important. And, this is an old saying, I guess, all means all, but all students, do they have equitable advantage of what's happening with a strategy, right? Is it meeting the needs of all of our students? And so when looking at equity, you will need to look at possibly different types of data than you have in the past. What comes to mind first is, for example, is like surveys, perception data, asking the kids, how's it going? What, do you feel that it's making a difference? Do you begin to feel like you're understanding, and so forth? So it's really important to do that. And of course, we remind everyone about the evidence, right? That is there. So it's just some questions to help your team. All right, a quick little tool to help you with showing progress too. Again, there's a lot in the process guide that will help you, especially when we look at scale and reach. How do you do it and why do you do it? And that's what the process guide's about. And this little tool is in there. if you can't find it, my contact information is at the end of this presentation, and just send me an email and I will send you whatever you need. We want to make sure that your team is really ready to go. All right, so going back and really looking at monitoring, I love this illustration because it really does talk about the fact that yes, we're always talking about equality, right? And then we quickly understood that equality did not mean that every kid got what they needed. All didn't mean all here. And so when we moved to equity, then yes, but then we're looking at the idea that what if our little guy here didn't have that box? What was going to happen? So the ultimate, I believe, in my opinion, is justice, is to make it so that it's for everyone, and so that everyone benefits from this. And so on the right-hand side, again, are some questions to ask about this. I think an important one that I know that when we used to get into our continuous improvement teams, we didn't always take the time to talk about the barriers of these equitable outcomes. And that's really important, because without doing that, I don't know how we would have begun to really try to solve that. Again, perception data, as I had mentioned before, key. We need to understand what the impact is to the people that we're focusing on and get their opinion. And we know even kindergartners can do surveys, right? There are ways to do that. So really make sure you do some collecting of that data. And then looking at the adjustments. And what happens sometimes is, best laid plans, there may be some unintended consequences that we didn't predict. And so we need to watch for those. And so if that does happen, that's asking that question way back in the beginning, what is working and what may not be working? Here's an example of when we look at this. So if there's any negative consequences, and maybe to a specific group of students, that needs to be addressed, of course, immediately. So again, NERN has some wonderful, this is a great example of just a simple checklist of what it looks like for implementing stages. We're in the installation, which is the second level of installing a goal and strategies. And here it's just really asking having some honest discussion about this. For example, implementation team, is it functioning well? Okay, so well can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but it's a good, transparent question to ask. The fidelity measure, this is another one, looking if we're following the plans the way we intended. What about policies and procedures? And this begins to really identify the systems that are in place. If we know that good systems can be a benefit to a team when trying to reach a goal, but we also know with the lack of systems, it can be a hindrance. So again, I emphasize this tool because it's easy, but it really targets those important areas that a team would really want to look at when implementing a plan. So, and this is the slide that Ben loves the most, because he has been really focusing on systems. And I think if you've been to any of our previous presentations, systems are key, right? So here's just a question, and to think about if you are doing that in your district. So monitoring your systems tools, we have a lot that's available. Again, process guide is definitely going to help you here, but we have in our state various tools, looking at the SWIFT team, looking at we have the WISC model here. Cognia has one. The large rectangle on the left is available through the state. This is what we did for district view as well as school view. So look at a systems framework and really to see. And then we also have this checklist in the process guide that goes through and really talks about the elements of your system. So as districts begin to understand systems goals and how to build systems goals, These are the types of systems goals you may want to look at. The instructional, the idea of student support's a big one, because that's where we can really put MTSS. Looking at curriculum instruction, you know, our human resources or talent management, communications, and so forth. So this may help you really start to frame your goal. You'll notice that we have a lot of guiding questions here. So please, if you're thinking of moving into building systems goals, this slide is going to be very important. And we have just, I think this week, added to the MICIP website under professional learning, the presentation that we did on systems goals. So that's there along with the slide deck. So if you want to go back and use that for, say, a staff meeting or two, please, we put everything on the web for your use as you move forward in implementing plans. As I mentioned before, we were going to come to talk about the hexagon tool. The hexagon tool actually is really important throughout the entire process of building plans and implementing plans. And you see here that when it really looks at that idea of program indicators, which is the green triangles, and then the implementation indicators. And underneath each of these in the MICIP, you'll find it specifically under the strategy area. But we really highly encourage you to look at these elements when reviewing your initial inventory, when you were looking at your data. And we're also going to recommend that if you begin to build limited maintenance goals, which is session 3 today, that you also use the hexagon tool to say, you know, what is our current state? How are things working? So this is really important. In, I think, the next release, which will be sometime in March, this will be the new visual for MICIP. This is I think 2.0 for NERN, and we will be updating that in MICIP as well. All right, so just to recap what we've done, we've looked at scale and reach, fidelity, and capacity. All of those have to do with implementation. But then we look at impact. So did it make a difference? Did we get and follow our interim target measures and end target measures? And I just want to stop and just remind some districts, when I work with districts and we look at the interim target measures, there's some that they forgot to really look at the date when it was due. So if you're going in and let's say you're going to conduct a survey 3 times a year, and you're going to do that for 5 years, you're going to have 15 interim targets. You want to really make sure you spell that out, because we're busy people at districts. And if it's not on our list of things to do, we will miss it. So really don't worry about how many interim targets you have. In fact, it's quite exciting when a team gets together and an interim target has been met and achieved, as well as, like, for example, an activity. Because when you click that button, there's a little celebration, and it feels good to know that we're making progress. But, you know, looking again, did we get the desired results? And that's what impact is all about. So when looking at this and looking at the end target measures, again, we're looking at that as the due date of your plan. That's the day you do this. Is that the value that defines the ultimate level of achievement of the measured goal? And hence this little graphic here is that, did we really achieve it all? Did we do what we need to do? And there's an impact tool at the end of the MICIP platform that provides you the opportunity to capture that conversation. But that's important, because it is also, that question also leads to an adjustment. So at the end of 3 years, if we come back and say, you know, we're almost there, but we didn't quite make it, if we just had 2 more years, we can do that. That's a really strong adjustment reason, right? So look at that. That's what making progress means in terms of end target. The interim target measures, as I said, is that little step along the way, right? So here's that, this again, it's like we go from one to the other, right? Are we progressing? So if the ultimate goal is to improve achievement in a particular area by 10%, you know, and you want to do this for 5 years, then you may say, okay, we're going to take it in increments. It doesn't have to be 2% every year, could be. But as a team, you talk about what is the expected progress. And that interim target measure is really, really important. Also, you know that when looking at interim target measures, that we base it on quantitative, qualitative, and tasks. So really take the time to look at that. Are there tasks that are in your plan that are essential in order to achieve your goal? So again, process guides help with that. Here's an example of different types of data that we'd like you to consider. The academic, both qualitative and quantitative, right? And those of you who, you know, our statistics group, that qualitative data becomes essential. I think as a whole, as a state community, we're good. We're comfortable with quantitative data. Numbers make sense, but it's really taking the time to find that qualitative data too. So just something to consider when looking at your interim and end target measures. Here's just a simple example of the types of data that we have in that sweet spot that happens in the middle, right? So we're looking at demographic perception, student outcome or academic, and then school progress. And here are questions to help you as you look at your plan to help that. And how does all of those intersect? So this graphic really kind of helps you pull that data, data sources, example types of data, and bring it together. If you were at the CI conference last October, we had the authors of Street Data present to us. This was an eye-opener, and the way that they've really looked at data is starting with a wide view. So if you think of satellite data, think of that as national or state data, what's happening. The map data may be something that looks at that particular school or maybe a particular grade level. And then street data is going right to the source of, like, so the kids, the parents, it's right there. I love their illustration of street, you know, it's like, we're right there. Do you have all those types of levels of data in your plan? And so when you go back and you look at that, or in your interim and end target measures, is that present? This is kind of fun. I found this recently in NERN, and I'm looking at this and it's like, oh, okay, this is a great way of visually, how are we progressing? And the little dots here, I always see those as our meeting dates. So, excuse me. So as we look at every time we meet, and when this is a particular strategy we're looking at right now, you know, do we know? Like, we know what the goal line is because we have our end target measures, right? Baseline is the day we implement our goal into the plan. That becomes baseline, and you'll see that in evidence under monitoring as well as in the evaluate button, because if you click on, there's a little box at the end of the title of like the measure. You click on that, it will give you the baseline view and then the current view of that data. So so this becomes really important. This is very visual. If you're a visual learner, this charting is a great thing to keep updated. All right, so when we look at adjustments, again, the warning was don't be quick to adjust, but there will be times when you will need to adjust. These questions are located in the adjustment button at the bottom of the monitoring goal page. And so these are the questions, you know, just generally, when we look at, did we use the right tools to monitor? That if we said no, then we need to adjust that to make sure we have them. What about our data story? Do we need to go back like something's missing. And there are many opportunities to look at your complete picture throughout the MICIP process. But when you start implementing a plan, sometimes it comes to light later. So there's always that. So here's something to consider. And then last is adjustments of the goal, maybe of the strategies and activities. What is important is have the conversation before you adjust. And it may be that you want to have the conversation a few times to where you're building towards adjusting a plan. And in MICIP, you have the ability to capture that discussion under create a note. All of those opportunities to capture discussion in MICIP is essential for the transition of leadership in your district, because you're capturing what is happening now. And so when someone new comes in, you could say, here are our discussion notes when monitoring our goal and monitoring our strategies. And this has been our journey to date. And it's very important that you keep really, doesn't have to be like huge notes, but really capture the conversation and be diligent about doing that. And then, as I said here, this is what this looks like in the MICIP platform, what the note it looks at. If you recall, I said that using MICIP and the compliance is a result, not the driver. Here's an example of that. So when using state federal funds, you need to do a program evaluation, and that process is embedded specifically in monitoring. So it is important that you have multiple notes under all those categories. Make sure, though, that you do not have to go in every time you monitor strategy. You don't have to answer those 3 areas every time, but over time, you want to have that complete picture. Make sure you have evidence of that, and then evidence here. And it came from our friends of the regional consultants, so thank you. Looking at systems review, meeting agendas, schedules, lesson plans. There's lots of different examples of evidence that they look for when coming in and doing an audit. Meeting notes are embedded in the MICIP platform, as I mentioned. They also want to know, are there various team members who are adding notes? To add notes, you have to have the ability to edit. That's a permission and for the user. So you just make sure that the team has that. And when you look at a note and you view it at the bottom of the text box, it says when it was created, and then when was it edited and by whom, so that you can tell if various people are adding to the plan. It's a written process, that we know that. And then the other thing that our regional consultants have suggested is, let's look at an org chart. Well, who are these people on your continuous improvement team? So in some cases, we know there are districts who just have one person implement elements into the plan. That's fine. But these are the people who are part of our team. This is what a program evaluation report would look like. These are the boxes you would check. And then you can save that here. There's a submenu in this little box here that says to create and modify a report. And so you can do that so that every time you're ready to do program evaluation, you will have that. All right. Moving on. This is what the cover page looks like for a program evaluation. And then here's the contact information. Ben and I are here to help. We're one of the same. Rennie is also a part of our team. If you have management for your users, he's the guy to call. So if you have a change in leadership and you need to add a new person as the MICIP administrator, he's the one that helps. He cannot help you with your user management. So that's done locally. And just a reminder that a MICIP administrator isn't like an administrator in the district. It is the person designated to manage users for the district. So with that, I think we're going to be brought back to, and we did use every second of our time.
On the next round of breakouts.